was talking to her yesterday.
Really not shocking considering.
Did you see who's here? I didn't expect.
Man, this service is freezing, isn't it? I should have brought another coat. Is that just being overdressed? Looking underdressed?
Hello. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Today, we celebrate the complicated legacy of our dearly departed sister, Redacted. Redacted was a member of our community, a sister, a daughter, a proud player of candlepin bowling, but most importantly, a mother. In her last will and testament, Redacted requested that her favorite daughter give her eulogy today. Her eldest daughter, Amanda, will be speaking instead.
You think there'll be food served? I don't want to be too rude or anything, but I mean, I woke up too late. I didn't have anything to eat for breakfast. I don't know. I know I'm being.
Good morning. I'm sure most of you are familiar with who I am. I'm Redacted's eldest daughter, Amanda, though some of you probably know me as one of the many nicknames that I went as throughout college and high school and middle school, Mainely Mandy. It honestly feels strange to be talking here today. For one thing, it's been almost 3 years since my mother and I had direct communication. For another, she's not actually dead. But hey, we're not going to let that get in the way of a good eulogy, am I right? Okay, apparently there are a few corpses in here after all. There's a lot that I could tell you about Redacted. For one thing, she wanted to be a lawyer, or so she told me once. Some of the musicians and bands that she listened to most often, which of course my siblings and I heard throughout our childhoods, were Joan Jett, Rob Zombie, Kiss, and basically any 80s hair band you can think of. She was actually supposed to go see Kiss live once, but she couldn't because she was pregnant with me. I was 2 weeks late, and she was supposed to go after, but So basically, I was told my entire childhood that it was my fault my mother didn't get to go see her favorite band live. I could tell you about my mother's love life, which was varied, complicated, messy. At her second wedding, my mother made a point to tell me that she had considered making me her maid of honor, but then decided on my sister instead. To this day, I don't know why my mother felt the need to tell me that. I guess I'll never know now. In 2022, a memoir called I'm Glad My Mom Died was published. The author, Jenette McCurdy, went into the complicated relationship that she had with her mother, who had died almost a decade prior. And by complicated, I mean really abusive. Yeah, complicated is that polite word we like to use for mixed company. Jenette's mother would belittle or dismiss her daughter's feelings, forcing her own dreams and aspirations onto her. She also carefully monitored Jenette's diet and weight, helping Jenette to eventually develop an eating disorder. Jenette was given vaginal examinations, was kept largely in the dark about changes happening to her body, and was also forced into having a television career. In one incident recorded in the book, Jenette's mother called her a host of insults, including fat, a slut, and a floozy. Afterwards, she asked Jenette to buy her a fridge. The reaction to the book was strong, to say the least. There were some who argued that it was in very poor taste, arguing that you just don't speak ill of the dead, which I think you know my feelings on. Many people, seemingly the vast majority, loved it. McCurdy has described in various interviews meeting abuse survivors sharing stories of their own parents, sometimes even breaking down in tears, at book signings and chance meetings. In one interview, McCurdy said, "If people relate to some of the most difficult aspects of the book, well, that's unfortunate. I hope that we can all laugh through it all together. That seems to be the case, so I'm really glad that people seem to be finding humor in the tragedy, and hopefully being able to heal through that. My mother raised myself, my brother, and my sister as a single mom in Central Maine. No easy task. She did have help, of course, not that she was always good at acknowledging it. My grandmother and my aunt were permanent fixtures throughout much of my childhood. My godmother was another important figure. There were many who came and went over the years. Friends my mother would eventually burn one too many times. Lovers who usually evaporated after a period of a few months. A string of what I now realize were likely social workers who also are due some credit for raising us. Well, maybe blame would be more like it. Really? Not a single laugh? My mom fake died. Come on! Distilling my mother's life into the right sequence of anecdotes to explain her adequately feels impossible. In fact, it doesn't just feel impossible. It is. I remember once as a kid, I had this sleepover. A few of my friends came over and we did, the typical girl things like paint our nails and argue about the lyrics of Moulin Rouge, like you do. And my mom was so charming. She joked with my friends and she was generous. And I remember one of my friends, I think it was redacted, she said to me, "Wow, your mom's so cool." And I was so angry, furious even. To this day, I struggle to put into words exactly what about that night felt so off, why I got so annoyed for my friends for liking her so much, but I did. I was annoyed, frustrated, positively disconcerted. That's the word, disconcerted. I couldn't help but notice that my mother always seemed to make sure she was her best self when my friends were over, when people were watching. It was like she knew she had to be her best self, that she had to put on a performance. She was really good at it. Throughout the book, we see examples of McCurdy, a child, having to put the feelings and needs of her mother first. Jenette becomes essentially an expert at reading her mother's facial expressions and body language, doing what she can to mitigate the worst of her mother's volatile mood. In one scene in the book, Jenette's mother becomes angry with her husband, and listen to the way Jenette describes it.
"I can tell immediately by her body language and facial expression, upright posture, lifted chin, gritted teeth, widened eyes, that she's not upset. She's not angry. She's livid. She's about to blow. Oh no, there's gotta be something I can do. It's now or never. Time for me to jump in. Love you, Mommy! I shout. I run towards her. I hug her. I've got this. I can keep her calm.
In a later chapter, Jenette explains.
No one else in the family seems to understand Mom's emotions. Everyone else walks around clueless, never knowing which mom they're gonna get. But I always know. I've spent my whole life studying her so that I can always know, because I always want to do whatever I can in any given moment to keep or make Mom happy.
The management of her mother's feelings and expectations isn't just about interpreting her emotions at any given point. It also required Jenette to lie and deprioritize her own needs. She doesn't tell her mother that her favorite color has changed because she knows it will upset her. When Jenette decides to try a new ice cream flavor, she quickly reverts back to her old go-to because her mother becomes emotional at the thought of her little girl growing up. Even when Jenette finally does land an acting gig, the focus isn't about her success. It's on her mother's emotions and how she's going to feel about it.
I jump into Mom's arms. She squeezes me. I'm elated. Everything's going to be different now. Everything's going to be better. Mom will finally be happy. Her dream has come true.
Jenette is her mother's confidant, hearing both juicy gossip about churchgoers as well as fears about her father's potential infidelity. Her mother has few friends and seems to criticize constantly the few that she does, putting Jenette in a position that no child was meant to be. On top of all this, Jenette eventually becomes basically the biggest financial provider for the family, putting even more pressure on her small shoulders. This phenomenon of a child being put in a role of essentially a caretaker or parent is called parentification, a term that was coined in the 60s. Parentification can be found in any family demographic and has been observed in multiple cultures. It can look like many things, but it is typically divided into two categories: emotional and instrumental. Emotional parentification is when a child takes on the responsibility of managing their parents' emotions, much like Jenette did. They basically take on the role of offering advice or just listening to their parents' problems, much in the same way that a therapist would. Instrumental parentification is more physical based. Think of things like paying the bills, doing chores, making meals, or taking care of a disabled parent. Have you ever seen the show Shameless? It's that. Basically that. Now, it is important to note that parentification is not inherently abusive. It's more of a spectrum that can include harmful effects, yes, on one end, but can actually be healthy on the other, something which much of the writing that I read on this subject made a point to acknowledge. And there are times when it is unavoidable. Take being a first-generation child to a pair of immigrants who are living in a country where they don't speak the dominant language. A child in that position might have to help their parents fill out tax forms or act as an unofficial translator. Depending on the area that they move to, they may be isolated from other people from their country of origin, and thus kind of have to rely on their child for emotional support. Sometimes parents have disabilities that might make certain physical tasks like chores much harder for them to do, maybe even impossible. It's that extreme side of the spectrum, when a child is unfairly being put in a position of emotional support and unpaid labor to an emotionally immature or maybe even violent parental figure, that I will be focusing on today. These parentified children were often not allowed to have any boundaries at all, have a poor sense of self, and will blame themselves for any disruption in the household. In her article, Were You a Parentified Child?, Navita Chandra explains,
much like your favorite therapist does for you, these children developed a way of intuiting how to support their parents and others. This was necessary for their own psychological survival. Not caring for their parents was not an option. The consequences could range from the parents withholding love from the children to outright violence between the parents themselves. And the child would then blame herself. These children do not have the opportunity to understand the problems they're trying to solve are not their own, or why the problems continue despite their best efforts. They learn only that they need to pay more attention, intuit better.
My mother shared a lot with me that I now recognize was wildly inappropriate. Complaints about her love life, her relationship with her mother, feelings about her friends, some of whom were the parents of my friends. My mother struggled with substance abuse, poverty, and very likely had some kind of undiagnosed personality disorder. Her moods could change on a dime. Unlike Jenette, I never knew exactly what version of my mother I was going to get. Would this be the mom who was charming, making strangers laugh with the loud jokes that she would tell for their benefit? Or is this the mom who was going to punch a hole in the wall and then spend the night at the hospital? This is why I don't believe in empaths, by the way. I don't think people have the power to feel other people's emotions. I think what happened is that at a young age, you learn to be tuned in with other people's emotions as a way to survive. Babe, that's not a superpower. You've got trauma. When my mother was in a good mood, my childhood was great. Honestly. She took us to the beach or to the movies. She was pleasant and friendly with my teachers. She sometimes got us impromptu gifts that she probably couldn't afford. But when she was displeased with me, she would get so mean and hurtful. She would say I was ungrateful, selfish, that I wasn't satisfied by anything she ever did. She'd mock me or yell at me. She threatened to beat me once with a yardstick because I might have forgotten to put toilet paper on the roll. I didn't ask her about that incident before breaking contact, but I have to wonder if she would have even remembered that. Most of the time, the most extreme examples sketched into my memory, she just happens to not remember. Specific, rather strategic memory loss is very common with estranged parents of adult children, but we'll get to that. I felt this need to be constantly tuned into my mother whenever she was around because it felt like I was in survival mode. I highly resented it. I came to start pushing back, to argue a lot more when I was a teenager, but it still happened. And it not being as bad as it could have been doesn't mean that it wasn't hell. I helped to raise and take care of my siblings. Even when we did have babysitters, it still felt like I was expected to make sure they were okay. I put them to bed or got them up and ready for school in the morning. Sometimes I made food for them or for my mother. I took them to the bathroom, cleaned up their vomit. I was a mother to us all. The subject of parentification is hardly universally accepted, and in fairness, some of those criticisms are valid. For one thing, even now, there are few studies on the subject, and those that do exist often have small survey pools, relying heavily on self-reporting. Much in the same way that gaslighting and imposter syndrome have both gotten this pop psychology veneer on it, discussions of parentification often slipped a little too uncomfortably close to universally experienced territory, thus robbing it of its specific meaning and usage. With that said, I do find that some arguments against parentification tend to be a little bit dismissive and sometimes even just seem to miss the point. Take this article from The Cut by Rachel Conley. Rachel argues,
why should we see it as a sign of trauma if you keep on top of cleaning your own toilet? We all have our issues and self-defeating tendencies we would like to work on. But if a person reaches adulthood and their biggest issue is that they're a supportive friend with a tendency to push themselves to always go above and beyond, I would say in the grand scheme of things that this person is doing pretty well.
Personally, I think categorizing the long-term effects of parentification being liking a clean toilet or being a slightly overeager, if yet still supportive friend to be a gross understatement. A more accurate picture is provided in Evita's piece.
As a consequence of always looking after others, little space is left for the child to know or express her own needs. The only legitimate needs seem to be those of others. Expressing her needs is met with frustration, anger, or other parental emotions that link her needs with fear and shame. This leads to the development of what pediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott in 1960 called a false self. In its unhealthiest form, this self-denying persona allows the parentified child to stop expressing and fulfilling her own needs and gain value from foregrounding the needs of others. It makes sense that parentified adults struggle with setting healthy, balanced boundaries and find themselves in abusive or exploitative relationships, whether with friends, coworkers, or romantic partners.
Parentified children are more likely to display disruptive behaviors such as self-harm, substance abuse, and struggle with relationships, all of which can continue well into adulthood. They are also more likely to develop depression, anxiety, and struggle to form healthy attachments to others. With this in mind, it's probably easy to see that such individuals struggle with abuse and manipulation in their later relationships.
Parentified adults are compliant. They are happy to give the other person all their space. In doing so, they are often manipulated and shamed, adding to their childhood neglect and emotional impoverishment. These patterns are so familiar to the adult that instead of raising alarms, the familiarity sustains them.
Those of you who are not new here probably remember that I was once in an abusive romantic relationship. I won't go over the details here because I've already done that once before. It's in this video and you can watch that if you'd like to learn more. I bring that up now because I think one of the reasons why I ended up in that relationship is that I had already grown up in an environment where abuse was so normal to me. I'm not saying it's my mother's fault that I was abused. Fault for that ultimately lie in the who abused me. But I think in a way I was trained not to question the abusive behaviors that I saw in that relationship because of the childhood that I had. If you're told your whole childhood that you're weird and gross and selfish, you'll accept anything because, I mean, if your mother, your own flesh and blood, thinks that about you, it must be true, right? My mother really liked my ex-fiance, by the way. Deep down, I think she hoped that we would get married and provide her with at least one grandchild. Thank fuck that never happened. It's not just him. I've had abusive friendships, stayed in toxic work environments years after I should have left. I've gotten better at placing boundaries and saying no, but I also tend to feel a lot of guilt when I do. Whether it's somebody wanting me to get involved with an obvious pyramid scheme or just not feeling up to helping a friend move, saying no can feel weirdly like a betrayal. My sense of who I am is shaky at best. I struggle a lot with feeling like I'm not good enough, constantly worried that I'm inconveniencing others or maybe I'm too needy. Sometimes I can just hear the words that my mother said to me as if she's standing right next to me, whispering in my ear. I haven't spoken to my mother in almost 3 years, but she still talks to me in her own sick, twisted way. Adult children choosing to go no contact with parents is not a new phenomenon, but it has reached greater visibility in the last few years. Some view it as a quirky new fad, something pushed strongly by TikTok therapists and social media influencers. At least one article I read compared it to an epidemic, which, I kind of thought maybe we were going to be a little more careful with that word in light of recent events, but, I guess you can make that comparison. The precise number of those estranged vary depending on the source. One 2015 study of mostly women who were grad or undergrad students reported that 26% of them recorded having extended periods of no contact, while 43% reported estrangement at some point. This would put the rates of estrangement on par with divorce statistics. A 2023 study with a much larger range of participants found lower rates of estrangement, about 6% for mothers and 26% for fathers. What has driven the increased visibility on the subject seems in part due to shifting cultural ideas about how to raise children. There just simply isn't as much of a desire to put parents on an untouchable pedestal as there once was. Baby boomer generation's ideas about children being seen, not heard, encouraged less honest and less direct communication, which has led many in my generation in particular to desire the exact opposite with their families. As content creator Bunny Hedaya put it,
I think our generation is more aware that they don't need to keep their family's secrets anymore. They don't need to accept abuse from family members. They don't need to continue the vicious cycle.
In my opinion, I think it's in part thanks to memoirs like McCurdy's book, as well as other pieces of media that show this more honest and disturbing view of toxic parenting, that we are seeing so much more conversation about this in the public. But maybe that's not entirely fair. After all, would the book have been received as well if it had come out at a different cultural standing point? Peg Street, for example, notes that if the book had come out even just a decade prior, it might not have been as well received. We're living at a time where the subject has increased visibility, which allows for an environment in which it's safe to actually talk publicly about it. It's basically like a chicken and egg situation, except nobody is writing think pieces about how, chickens are narcissists, that they don't want to speak to their roosters anymore. High profiles of estrangement have certainly helped to also bring more attention to the subject as well. Look how big of news Prince Harry and Meghan Markle walking away from the royal family was. I'm old enough that I remember when Angelina Jolie's estrangement from dad John Voight was headline news. Does anyone else remember that? You remember when he went on TV and told everybody she had mental problems? Yeah, so shocking she didn't want to talk to him after that. Another fairly well-known example is that of Elon Musk and his daughter Vivian, who is trans. Mr. Never Heard of a Train Before has claimed that their estrangement is due to cultural Marxism and claims that he sees her as having died after contracting a woke mind virus.
Vivian was born gay and slightly autistic, two attributes that contribute to gender dysphoria. I knew that from when he was about 4 years old, and he would pick out clothes for me to wear, like a jacket, and tell me it was fabulous, as well as his love of musicals and theater. But he was not a girl.
There's a whole lot to unpack in this tweet, much of which does lie outside of the limitations of this particular eulogy. I do, though, want to bring some special attention to the fact that there are a lot of myths and just straight up lies that get circled around in gender critical types around people who are trans and autistic. Friend of the channel, Ember, has actually already done a video on that subject, so I'd highly recommend watching that after you finish this video. But even setting aside Musk's obvious transphobia, Vivian has come forward to share her side of the story, and there are some discrepancies.
This is entirely fake. Like, literally none of this ever happened. Ever. I don't even know where he got this from. My best guess is that he went to the Milo Yiannopoulos School of Gay Stereotypes, just picked some at random and said, good enough, in a last-ditch attempt to garner sympathy points when he is so obviously in the wrong even in his own story. I did not have a love of musicals and theater when I was 4, because, I was 4. I didn't know what those things were. I never picked out jackets for him to wear, and I was most certainly not calling them fabulous, because literally, what the I did not use the word fabulous when I was 4, because once again, I would like to reiterate, I was 4. This entire thing is completely made up, and there's a reason for this. He doesn't know what I was like as a child because he quite simply wasn't there. And in the little time that he was, I was relentlessly harassed for my femininity and queerness. Obviously, he can't say that, so I've been reduced to a happy little stereotype long to use at his discretion. I think that says a lot about how he views queer people and children in general. I want to make one thing absolutely clear. I disowned him, not the other way around.
Now, of course, not knowing Vivian or Musk personally, do I know for certain who's telling the truth here? Of course not. Maybe Vivian is the truth for one, or maybe it's Musk. The guy who once said that an infant child of his died in his arms only for the mother of said child to come forward and say this was a blatant lie and she knew it was because it was in her arms that said child died? Who knows? I will say that even with Musk's personal history, I would personally find myself more inclined to believe Vivian anyway. There's a long documented history of parents of trans children turning into just complete asses the second they lose access. I can't really talk about that in this video, again, outside of the limits of this particular eulogy, but Kaylin Conrad has made a series of videos on the subject if you'd like to know more. Regardless of who you personally believe, I do think it's rather interesting that a lot of estranged parents tend to talk about their children in very negative ways. They often dismiss and belittle their child's feelings and paint themselves as the ultimate victim. Musk presents himself as a grieving father. The royal family seems to have mostly kept silent, but you do occasionally hear some mutterings of them having been deeply hurt by Megxit. Cursed phrase. Voight certainly doesn't seem shy at all about shedding some literal tears on camera for some added sympathy. Today, online forums and social media allow estranged parents to find community with others who are going through the same thing. Now, some of them are actually looking to improve themselves and are just seeking support like normal people, and that's totally fine. There are some who are clearly just looking for echo chambers to validate their suspicions that they have been unfairly treated. One deep dive I found exploring the world of estranged parent forums pointed out that there seems to be some glaring plot holes in a lot of these parents' stories. They will claim ignorance of why their adult children have gone no contact, but then also sometimes share some of the reasons given, all while being very dismissive.
Sometimes when I have tried, all I've had back is pages and pages of abuse. It kills me and my husband when we have to read what a despicable person I am, how I'm evil and twisted and negative and 1,000 other things too. I sent an email to the middle son asking what we had ever done, as after all these years no one has ever spelled it out to us. The reply last night was unbelievable. The things he said were cruel, vindictive, and completely untrue. He remembers things in a totally distorted way, and he believes 100% that this stuff is true. No matter how much we try to tell him, he has it wrong.
The parent claims that what they were told was completely, unquestionably untrue, and yet she never actually shares what they said. They said they were called evil, but not why. There are no specific examples given at all. I find that pretty suspicious. Further, they seem to be claiming that their child has false memories, which is going to make any discussion of previous wrongdoing very difficult. That may even explain why they've never been previously talked to about harmful behavior, assuming that part is true. It doesn't exactly sound like they're that open to hearing anything that sits outside of their version of reality. Which, need I remind you, is pretty consistent with statements and behaviors from abusers. Telling your victim that they were wrong and they remembered something incorrectly is literally the definition of gaslighting. As the author of the deep dive explains,
what was in the pages and pages that her sons wrote her? Why did it count as abuse and not as an explanation? Were her sons really able to fill multiple pages with nothing but, "Dear Mom, you're despicable, vile, twisted, and negative. I hate you. I really, really hate you because you're vile and twisted and negative. You're a bad person and you should feel bad. I feel bad because you're so bad." Or was there anything solid in there? Anything at all to explain why they thought their mother was despicable? When members do say what the allegations were, they paraphrase heavily, choosing the most trivial offenses and trimming away all context.
I tried on occasion to talk to my mother about the way she hurt me, how the way she summarized certain stories didn't just quite add up to the way I remembered it. But it was always really hard. I think part of that is because in my family, it's been very much normalized, the way I'm sure it has in many others, to not talk about the unpleasant stuff, especially if another family member is involved. The pattern goes a little something like this. There's some kind of disruption, an outpouring of emotion and spite. People involved hurl insults at each other. A brief period of no talking ensues. And then one day, they're in the same room together, talking like nothing ever even happened. Until, of course, the next conflict, the next disruption, which will inevitably involve bringing up past wrongs, including whatever the most recent previous conflict was. Sprinkle in some comments about prioritizing family and not making such a big scene from the family matriarch on top. Shaken, not stirred. If you're lucky, the story becomes funny, something to be shared amongst laughter at every family gathering from here to the day we die. Let's talk about the time that Aunt Redacted got Mom fired from the place they both worked at. What fun. Also, who owns the Highlander DVDs? I have no idea. We can never seem to agree. When presented with my and my siblings' memories of our childhood, my mother's response has often been to either say that she doesn't remember it happening that way, or to laugh and shake her head, saying, well, I wasn't always the best mother, was I? And in my own memory issues, which apparently is very common for victims of abuse, and it makes true accountability and reconciliation almost impossible. Hell, even when my mother is truthful with me, I have to be on guard about it. She's very strategic with the truth, using it in the past to manipulate me, to make me do things that she ultimately wants me to do. I don't even know if she knows the truth anymore. How do you keep a person like that in your life? Why should you, beyond some weakly defined, begrudging promise to honor flesh and blood above all else? She's your mother. She won't be around forever. You promise? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a moment to address what I imagine could be some of the more passionate responses to this video. Number one, probably the most obvious, but let's get it out of the way first. No, I don't actually want my mother to die. She is functionally dead to me, but I don't actually wish any harm to befall her. Most of the time, I try to conduct my life without thinking about her at all. Sometimes I even succeed. The saying, someone is dead to me, is just that. A saying, a maybe not so clever turn of phrase that I'm using in this video because honestly, it just kind of hits my brain in the right way. Okay? So please, spare me the comments about how evil I am wanting my mother to die, something which I certainly haven't said in this video, nor anywhere else. Number two, yes, I am aware that parenting is extremely challenging. I literally helped to raise my siblings. I am very much aware of this. In fact, I got so much of a taste of it when I was young that I made a decision later in life to permanently alter my own body so as to avoid that ever happening to me. Truly one of the best decisions I've ever made. Raising kids is hard. It is a full-ass commitment, a lifetime one. And I am honestly in awe of people who can do so very well, especially those who maybe didn't have the best parenting modeled for themselves when they were younger. Shout out to my sister who was raising my adorable nephews and is just doing so well. I'm really proud of her. I think flocking to that excuse, though, that parenting is challenging, ergo any and all judgment shouldn't be entertained for even a second, is a bit silly, though. Isn't it? I mean, I'm sure being president is hard, but it doesn't mean I don't get to criticize the president and those who decide to be one. I mean, you know, at least for now. Oh, dear God. My mother is not above criticism just because she chose to do a hard thing. Number three, no, I am not being abusive. Can an adult child be abusive to their parents? Yes, of course. Elder abuse is a thing after all. But I don't think an adult child not speaking to a parent is in and of itself abusive. I would need to have a lot more details and context before I'm willing to make that jump. I'm not even joking when I say it's possible I will be called abusive in response to this video. Because, well, fun story, it's already kind of happened to me before. A therapist that I follow on Instagram, username TherapyGhost, real name Sandy Tufts, makes a lot of content specifically about adult children choosing to go no contact with parents. As you can imagine, she gets quite a lot of for doing so. One time, I actually left a comment on one of her videos because, I just wanted to leave a little positivity. I, just really tell her how much I appreciate her, like, validating some of the feelings that I have. And in response to that, some random user who apparently was hate following her made a point to comment to me, "How does it feel to be abusive to your mother now?" Well, me for being nice, I guess. Number four, if you can't fathom going no contact with a parent or any other family member for that matter, then great. That's awesome. Seriously, why the should I care though? Okay, that's admittedly a little harsh, but seriously, I really hate this response and any argument. Like, it kind of reminds me of when I bring up being polyamorous, even in passing, and the other person makes a point to tell me how, oh, I could never be polyamorous. Like, cool? I didn't fucking ask? Like, I'm not trying to recruit you or anything. There are plenty of people out there for whom going no contact with a family member would be out of character and probably a bad idea. I am not encouraging anybody else to do so unless they already feel strongly about it. But for some people, like myself, some of my friends, and many others that you can find if you just poke around the internet for a few minutes, it was the right decision for us. And whether or not you would do so the same really doesn't make a difference. A decision that I would like to point out was not made lightly, which actually brings me to number 5. No, this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. While sometimes the final breaking point can be rather small in light of previous offenses, the straw that breaks the camel's back is usually years in the making. In my case, I've even done a few prior soft no-contact stints before this happened, which usually only lasted a few months before I would eventually break down and start speaking to her again. Getting to the point of no contact is a process that takes years, even decades to do so. We are talking years of enduring lying, manipulation, gaslighting, ignoring of boundaries, and denial of wrongdoing. It took decades of my mother being extremely selective with the truth, her selfishness, and her wanting me to prioritize her over anything else going on in my life, but rarely returning the favor before I cut off contact. There were plenty of times I probably should have cut off contact with her much sooner than I did. Like the time she told me she was going to take care of the student loan I had to take out, right? Here I am, all stupidly thinking she's going to actually follow through and pay off the student loan that she told me that she was going to. Lo and behold, I find out years later that she hadn't made a single payment on it, meaning that by the time I found out about it and realized I was going to have to pay it after all, it was actually much more than it would have been if she had just been honest with me and asked me to start paying it from the get-go. I want to make it very clear here. I'm not mad that I had to pay a student loan for my education instead of my mother. I'm upset that my mother wasn't honest with me about it from the get-go so that the amount of debt I had to pay off wasn't as high as it was. One time, my mother promised to help my brother move, made a big deal about how she was gonna, come into town early and to avoid traffic because a bunch of people in my family don't understand that Portland's not Boston, but that's like a whole other rant I could get into. And she ended up being so late and gave us so little information about what was going on that I finally just told her not to bother to show up and asked a friend for help instead. And I still didn't go no contact with her until like a few years after that. I'm not claiming to be a saint, obviously. But what I am saying is I think it's rather silly to assert that this is some kind of spur-of-the-moment, rash decision when there are years of history to look back on. And this is supported by my research, too.
The reasons for estrangement are most usually historical. While I am certain that political divides and other disagreements can be drivers of adult-child parental estrangement, I'd say that nearly all of the adults I've interviewed who are estranged are dealing with parental treatment. Whether that's marginalizing, ignoring, hyper-criticizing, scapegoating, or anything else that has been going on consistently since childhood, and with which the adult child has struggled over since. Recognition is a slow process, impeded by both denial and the hope that the mistreatment will magically end, and both recognition and subsequent low contact or estrangement are often set in motion by a third party's comments and observations, a spouse, partner, friend, or therapist, or by the adult child's recognition that the mistreatment is being extended to his or her own children. The latter comes up all the time.
It's not a single decision that ultimately leads an adult child to cut off contact with a parent. It's a long established pattern that ultimately places us in the position of having to choose our own survival over their unfair expectations of us. Last one, no, I don't owe my mother anything. The fuck? The idea that children are forever indebted to their parents is on its face ridiculous. Like, how is that your bar for judging how good a parent is? Like, that's the whole job? Again, I'm really not trying to downplay how important good parenting is, and especially how challenging it is in today's economy. I'm just saying I think our standards could be a little bit higher. I know that for some people, there is just no explaining to this to them at all. These are the kind of people who would say something like, blood is thicker than water, even though it has been speculated that that full saying might actually be blood is thicker than the water of the womb, which means the exact opposite of what they're trying to say. But in fairness, that is disputed. These are the kind of people who will call all of this some kind of new fad, blame therapists for brainwashing their children, and then also call people like me spoiled brats who should have been spanked more. I actually was spanked a few times as a child. Weirdly enough, I don't actually remember any of the reasons why I got spanked, just that it happened, and it hurt, and it made me not trust my mother. That was the sole takeaway. Side note, if I am a spoiled brat, whose fault is that exactly? Why are estranged parents so quick to try and take credit for their child's successes, but then take none of the blame for their failures? To those people, the ones who wrote me off at the top of this video before I ever even said a word, I have to ask the obvious question. Do you really think I want this? Do you really think that when presented with the choice to have or not have a mother under normal circumstances, that I would choose not to? Of course I want to have a mom. I would love to have the kind of mom that some of my friends were blessed to have, the kind of mom that my sister is being to her children, someone that I feel safe and can rely on. The first time that I found out that not everybody was drained, even after a brief interaction with their mother, I was truly blown away. Every time I saw my mom interact with my friends, much like the story that I shared earlier, I always found myself wishing that this is the way that she could be more often. That she could be this charming, friendly, cool mom that people seem to think I had. If my mother could have stopped lying to me. If she had maybe started seeing a therapist consistently. If she had just changed the patterns in her behavior. She had stopped sending me random texts asking if she should divorce her husband and move into the apartment building I was living in. She had just changed one diaper and actually helped my sister out for once. If she could have stopped saying, "Oh, I know I wasn't the best mother," while laughing, understatement of the century redacted. If she hadn't abandoned multiple childhood pets of mine literally on the side of the road, a fact I only learned very recently, by the way, and has me absolutely horrified. If she hadn't given away that jacket I wanted so bad. Okay, that one's admittedly kind of petty in light of everything else, but I'm still mad about that. She knew I wanted it. If she hadn't kicked me out of the house. If she could have apologized just once, sincerely, for one of the many things that I have listed out in this video and the many others that did not make it into this, then maybe I could still have a mother. But the fact is, I don't. I haven't in a very long time, long before I stopped speaking to her, and it is entirely her own doing. I gave her so many chances. You have no idea. So many times I tried to push through for the sake of family and for the good times, because yes, there were good times, and time again, my mother failed me. She hurt me. She was manipulative. She lied to me. She was dramatic. She was cruel. She was self-centered. She was my first abuser. And if she's watching this right now, I have only one thing to say to her. Leave me alone. Please. Have you all seen Lady Bird? Great movie. I really fell in love with it the first time I saw it. A coming-of-age story of a theater girl who comes from a much lower economic bracket than that of her friends and has dreams of moving somewhere else. Yeah, that was always guaranteed to hit me in the feels. Man, some of those scenes between Lady Bird and her mother, they're just so raw and real, you know? And familiar. All too familiar. The movie ends with Lady Bird reverting back to the name that she was given, finding comfort in the religion that she grew up with, and reestablishing contact with her mother. That is ultimately her decision to make. I completely understand that, but it does leave me feeling a bit uncomfortable, because the movie seems to be saying that it is on Lady Bird to forgive. That it was ultimately her fierce independence and selfishness that led to the conflict in the first place. Sure, her mother literally refused to speak to her after she decided to go to a different college than what she had decided was most appropriate. And yes, at one point Lady Bird became so frustrated with communicating with her mother that she chose to throw herself out of a moving vehicle rather than dealing with that frustration anymore. But you know, mothers have it so hard. The movie also seems to kind of go out of its way to present Lady Bird as an unreliable narrator, or at the very least a character who is in opposition of all of the facts. Our protagonist is told how amazing her mother has been to others, as though that somehow invalidates any criticisms Lady Bird herself could have. Marion takes in a young woman who has been disowned by her family. She's the sole bread earner because her husband, Lady Bird's father, has depression. This is a fact, by the way, that she doesn't even share with Lady Bird until she has an opportunity to use it to make her feel guilty and selfish for having a different vision of her life than what Marion has in store. The sacrifices that her mother makes are challenging and noteworthy. It does show that she can be a very caring and compassionate person, but that does not excuse the way that she treats Ladybird. It doesn't excuse the immature handling of receiving criticism, nor making her daughter feel incompetent. Honestly, the way the movie at times feels like it's lecturing just reminds me so much of the way that adult children like myself will get criticism if we deign have the audacity to talk about any of this publicly. As one estranged adult child put it,
I find it incredibly difficult and draining to explain to someone who has healthy family relationships why I don't speak to my father and why it has so many ripple effects even now. I use humor to lighten the subject, but even that is so draining because I'm then using my energy to make someone else feel comfortable with my situation.
Explaining why you decide to go no contact with a parent is extremely difficult. I've been doing it now for, maybe an hour or so at this point, and it still feels like I'm doing it so messily, like I'm missing things. I'm not explaining myself well enough. And this isn't even the first time that I've tried to talk about it. Some of you may remember that I made a video a couple of years ago about my decision to not have children. It was also about the movie Aliens. You know, like you do. And that script, while it was a lot of fun to write, was honestly also very challenging for me. Because at the time, I wasn't really ready yet to be transparent with the biggest motivating factor about why I'm child-free, which, frankly, is because of my mother. The fear of turning out like my mother is basically a phobia of mine at this point, and I've done a lot to try and avoid that. When I think about that video essay, I can sort of see the shape of my mother, you know, like a whole, like a puzzle piece that's missing, the final piece. And so because of that video essay wasn't as good as it could have been. But I also wasn't really ready yet to be that public about my mother and I's relationship. It's not like I've hidden it exactly. Like, I do talk about it sometimes. Like in social media, for example, I've shared a few stories here or there. By the way, at Mainely Mandy, basically everywhere if you want to follow me. I'm always going to be proud of that video essay. Like, I put a lot of work into it, and I do really like the way it came out. But I am always going to regret it a little bit, you know, making it before I was really ready to talk about that aspect of it. Well, maybe regret isn't the right word. A sprinkling of cringe is more accurate. This script has been very challenging to work on, and I think in part it's because some of my own still lingering defensiveness and guilt on the subject. I am just as much of a victim of societal coding and expectations around relationships between parents and their adult children. I'm not some enlightened being over here, okay? I'm just a meat balloon with feelings. I don't really want to have to stand up here and justify my feelings because ultimately, none of you get to question me. Regardless of why anyone decides to no longer speak to a parent, nobody else outside of that is owed an explanation. You can feel however you want about it, of course, but it doesn't really change anything. I'm not going to take advice from strangers on the internet who have never even spent a minute with my mother. But almost by accident, by way of the medium in which I have chosen to talk about this, I have provided some explanation. Because hopefully, if I do explain, if I paint the picture with a bit more detail, you all will finally understand why somebody like me ends up in a position like this. Or maybe somebody else out there who is going through the same thing as me sees this video and realizes that it's not just them. And they feel a little less alone. So yeah, I needed to pace myself with this video, which is part of why it took so much longer for it to come out. All that is to say that I really appreciate the patience and understanding of all of my audience, which includes, though of course is not limited, to my Patreon supporters who literally give me money to do this. Thank you all so much. You all rock. Do I know for certain that I will never speak to my mother again? Of course not. You know, I'm not psychic. I can't see the future. People do change. I do believe truly that people can grow and change, are very much capable of reconciling that image of themselves that they have in their head with the reality and face real accountability. I'm a never say never kind of gal. I don't think it's very likely, given her track record. It takes a lot of work for reconciliation to be possible, and based off of what I know and what I have heard in the last few years, it doesn't sound like my mother is anywhere close to where she needs to be for that to be possible. But it's not impossible. In fact, I can tell you from experience that reconciliation with a parent is possible. Because twist, this isn't the first time I've gone no contact with a parent before. Twist, 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 twist. Oh shit, did you see that coming? Stupid. We'll cut that out. I was estranged from my father for 17 years. We only started talking rather recently, actually, after I turned 30. There's one major difference between my mom and my dad. My dad, he and I can actually have conversations about the harm that has been done. And there's no deflection, there's no dismissal, just him accepting full responsibility for that harm and him taking tangible steps to address that behavior. Our relationship is still pretty awkward, to be honest with you. It's a slow, steady progression, but steps have been made. You know, I actually spent a birthday with him, which was interesting. And he even came and saw me perform recently for the first time in my life. I recognize it's a little weird to be like a 36-year-old woman all excited that my daddy came to see me perform, but like, I never had that growing up, okay? So please indulge me. I have already given my mother many, many opportunities to be a better parent to me, and she has elected time and time again not to. The only opportunities she has ever taken were the ones to disappoint me, to hurt me. If I choose to never give my mother another chance, that is my decision, 100%, and you all will respect it, like it or not. By the way, I shouldn't have to say this, but I'm going to. My father has never once provoked me or influenced me or encouraged me in any way to go no contact with my mother. That was very much a decision I made on my own. He had nothing to do with it. He's been supportive. That's it, okay? So let's not make any weird rumors or whatever in the comment section. Have you all seen that episode where BoJack Horseman gives a eulogy at his mother's funeral?
Hey.
Oh, sorry. Spoilers, by the way. What a great episode. One of my favorites, to be honest with you. The majority of the episode is the aforementioned eulogy, just BoJack standing in front of a group of mourners, just talking uninterrupted about his mother. It's vulnerable, honest, funny, painful. BoJack and his mother had a pretty complicated relationship, which of course you all know by now means abusive, mostly verbal and emotionally. She blamed BoJack for her life not going the way that she wanted, mocked him, and likely helped him develop his various substance issues. At the end of her life, she was a sad, confused old woman, her ability to recognize reality or even her own son mostly gone. Her death was inevitable, expected, maybe even cathartic. I certainly didn't cry any tears for her. The episode's one of my favorites. I find it, I don't know, weirdly comforting. When I watch that episode, I think about the kind of eulogy I would give for my mother if she, actually died right now. Would I get up here, wear a pretty black dress, tell the kind of lies that she would have liked me to have said, Oh, my mom, she was so great. The world is worse off without her. I miss her so much. No one can say a bad word about her. Boo-hoo-hoo. Stand up here and give out all the empty platitudes so that all of you fuckers can give the expected ones back. Or would I get up here and tell you all the truth? That my mother is a horrible human being who hurt me and my siblings far too many times for me to count. That she maintained few of her friendships, and I'm glad I never have to deal with her again. I could make a scene, smash a vase, punch her corpse. I could get up here and just start crying uncontrollably, or I could go completely catatonic. I have really no idea what I will do. I really want to be able to say that I'm going to be able to forgive her one day, that I'll be able to accept who she is and what she did and what I am as a result of that. But will I? Should I? McCurdy ultimately decided that she didn't. In one interview, McCurdy explained that she did try to forgive her mother. For years after her death, she really tried. In a conversation she had with her therapist, she said,
"When will I get there? What's it going to take?" I was trying to justify her behavior or make sense of it or empathize with her. My therapist said, "What if you don't need to find that forgiveness? What if in trying to find forgiveness, you're still doing your mom's work?" It was really what I needed to hear and felt like a tremendous weight lifted.
So much pressure to forgive and forget and just move forward. But how can I do that when she won't stop doing the same behaviors that have been an issue since I was a child? I've lost count how many times she borrowed money from me that she never paid back, despite her promises otherwise. I have caught her in so many lies, starting from, just lying about what time she was going to pick me up, all the way to the fate of some of my childhood pets. This woman, this grown-ass human being, faked a seizure at a 4-year-old's birthday party, my nephew's birthday party, because she wanted to see if they knew what to do if she had a seizure. She kicked me out of my home. So one day, when I was 18 years old, I had went out with my godmother and my aunt to get prom stuff, my prom dress and my shoes. It was the kind of thing where we were gone for quite a few hours. After school, I got home sometime in the evening. I don't remember exactly what time. It was just late. And I remember that I was so excited to show my mom my prom dress. I really loved my prom dress. And I was really excited for her to see it when she got home from work. And the very first thing she asked me about when she got home wasn't how the day had gone. It wasn't anything about my prom dress. She asked me about why I hadn't cleaned yet. We got into a huge fight, the worst we had ever had up to that point. And at the conclusion of it, she told me that she couldn't handle me anymore and that I needed to find somewhere else to live by the end of the week. Less than an hour later, after sobbing my eyes out in the bedroom that I shared with my kid sister, who was desperately trying to comfort me, my mother walked into the bedroom and asked it to see my prom dress, just acting like nothing had even happened. But I'm the unreasonable one for not wanting her in my life anymore, for not just giving her an easy way out and blindly forgiving her. You know what? That. I would much rather work on trying to forgive myself, which honestly is probably harder ultimately, but I do think a far more worthy manner of spending my time. Before I wrap this up and we get to the blessed part of the evening where we drink copious amounts of alcohol, I do want to leave something here specifically for anyone who might be thinking about or has already gone no contact with a parent. In my resource document, which will be linked down below, you can find all of my sources that I cited in this video, as well as some that I didn't cite directly, but definitely influenced the general shape of my script. Also included in that are some personal testimonies from other people who have gone through this. I personally really enjoyed I'm Glad My Mom Died, and I highly recommend it to people, but I also recognize it might not be everyone's cup of tea. While working on this script, I took some time to read the book Moms Who Can't Love, A Healing Guide for Daughters by Susan Ford. Susan's book was a very powerful read, particularly the bits that were from actual patients that she's worked with over the years. Captain Awkward has a lot of really interesting advice posts, particularly dealing with parent estrangement and challenging parent relationships that I wanted to make sure to highlight. Choosing to go no contact with a parent or even just drastically reducing your time around them can be incredibly hard. It can be isolating and overwhelming, fill you with doubt and guilt, and all of that, I want you to know, is completely normal. No matter how it feels, no matter how much it hurts when people try to tell you otherwise, there are others who have gone through this. I'm going through it. And I want you to know that I am so sorry for what you're going through. You are not alone. I know it's a little hokey to read a quote at a funeral, even a fake one, but I would like to take a moment to read some words from a very brave woman who I admire deeply. Why do we romanticize the dead? Why can't we be honest about them?
Especially moms. They're the most romanticized of anyone. Moms are saints, angels by merely existing. No one could possibly understand what it's like to be a mom. Men will never understand. Women with no children will never understand. No one but moms know the hardship of motherhood, and we non-moms must heap nothing but praise upon moms because we, lowly, pitiful non-moms, are mere peasants compared to the goddesses we call mothers. Maybe I feel this way now because I viewed my mom that way for so long. I had her up on a pedestal. She was a narcissist. She refused to admit she had any problems, despite how destructive those problems were to our entire family. My mom emotionally, mentally, and physically abused me in ways that will forever impact me. Her death left me with more questions than answers, more pain than healing, and many layers of grief. The initial grief from her passing, and then the grief of accepting her abuse and exploitation of me, and finally the grief that surfaces now when I miss her and start to cry. Because I do miss her and start to cry. I miss her pep talks. Mom had a knack for finding just the right thing in a person to get them to light up and believe in themselves. I miss her childlike spirit. Mom had an energy that could at times be so endearing, even captivating. And I miss when she was happy. It didn't happen as often as I would have liked. It didn't happen as often as I tried to force it to happen. But when she was happy, it was infectious. Sometimes when I miss her, I start to fantasize about life would be like if she were still alive. And I imagine that maybe she'd have apologized and we'd have wept in each other's arms and promised each other we'd start fresh. Maybe she'd support me having my own identity, my own hopes and dreams and pursuits. But then I realize I'm just romanticizing the dead in the same way I wish everyone else wouldn't.
Well, that's my time here. I'm sorry for getting a little carried away. My understanding is from Pastor Mandy that we will now be moving into the reception hall where there will be some snacks and refreshments. This is a great time, by the way, to pull an Irish goodbye if you feel a little too awkward for small talk. I knew it! I knew I could get you! Thank you for coming to today's service. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you are financially comfortable enough to, maybe pop over onto my Patreon to support this eulogy and the production costs of this funeral. Take care of yourselves and take no shit. Not even from your mother.